Ben Huang had survived 3 connecting flights through space stations that smelled variously of recycled air, desperation, and what he sincerely hoped was synthetic chicken, only to discover that his company's idea of a luxury corporate retreat involved a bus tour of ruins. Actual ruins. On a planet where the tap water came with a 15-minute boiling advisory and the hotels still used physical keys. He pressed his forehead against the tour shuttle's window and watched Viridian 7's capital city slide past in shades of pearl and amber. The architecture was admittedly stunning, all flowing curves and crystalline spires that caught the light of the system's twin suns, but Ben's appreciation for aesthetic beauty had died somewhere around hour 6 of the last flight, murdered by a malfunctioning seat that had left him wedged at a 45-degree angle while a Tellurian businessman snored directly into his ear. And here we see the celestial gardens, where the Third Dynasty cultivated moonflowers that bloomed only during eclipse season, their guide announced through the shuttle's speaker system with the enthusiasm of someone reading a terms of service agreement. Ben noticed she was playing a mobile game on her datapad while she talked. "Does anyone know where the bathrooms are in the palace?" Ben asked, raising his hand slightly. The guide didn't look up. "All facilities are clearly marked with standard Galactic signage. Please hold questions until the designated question period at the end of the tour." Ben had been holding it since the last rest stop, which had been at a gas station that appeared to be actively haunted. He wasn't going to make it to the designated question period. The Imperial Palace rose before them like a fever dream rendered in architecture, a massive structure that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of view. It had been built by the founders, the guide explained in her monotone, using techniques that modern science still couldn't fully replicate. Ben thought it looked like someone had given a neural network too much creative freedom and unlimited funding. The shuttle hissed to a stop. 20 exhausted corporate employees filed out, most of them immediately checking their communication devices to discover that Viridian 7's data network was, according to one of Ben's colleagues, aggressively medieval. Ben's own phone displayed a spinning loading icon that seemed more like a philosophical statement than a technical process. "The tour will proceed through the public wings," the guide said, already walking toward the entrance. "Please stay with the group. The palace security systems are ancient and occasionally aggressive toward unauthorized movement." Ben fell behind almost immediately. His left shoe had developed a squeak somewhere over the third planet, and he discovered that if he walked at exactly the normal pace, it produced a rhythmic sound not unlike a distressed squeaky toy. Slowing down helped. Also, he desperately needed to find a bathroom, and he wasn't going to find one by looking at the ceremonial hall of hereditary succession or whatever they were being shepherded toward. The palace interior was a maze of corridors that seemed to bend in ways that weren't entirely geometrically sound. Ben passed chambers filled with holographic displays showing long-dead monarchs, their faces frozen in expressions of noble suffering. He passed what appeared to be a room entirely dedicated to fancy hats. He passed a window that looked out onto a courtyard that definitely hadn't been visible from the outside of the building. The universal bathroom sign, he reasoned, had to be around here somewhere. How different could alien plumbing signage really be? Very different, as it turned out. Every door was marked with symbols that might have been letters or possibly abstract art. Ben tried 3 doors in increasingly desperate succession, finding a broom closet, a room full of floating orbs that hummed at him accusingly, and what he was 70% sure was someone's office, though it contained only a single chair and a plant that appeared to be photosynthesizing backwards. The 4th door opened onto a circular chamber that took his breath away, though that might have been the urgent biological pressure. The room was enormous, its walls a seamless curve of some material that seemed to be somewhere between crystal and mother-of-pearl. Light filtered down from an oculus in the ceiling, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with faint energy. And in the center, on a raised dais, sat a chair. Not just a chair. The chair. Even Ben, in his current state of discomfort, could recognize something significant when he saw it. It was wrought from the same strange material as the walls, but it seemed to pulse with a subtle inner light. Geometric patterns flowed across its surface like liquid. It was beautiful and slightly ominous, the kind of furniture that definitely had a rule against sitting on it. Ben's back ached. His feet hurt. His bladder was staging a full-scale revolt. The tour group was somewhere far away, probably learning about tapestries or hereditary bloodlines or whatever. This room was quiet and blessedly empty, and that chair looked comfortable. He'd rest for just a moment. Just 30 seconds. No one would even know. Ben climbed the 3 steps to the dais and collapsed onto the throne with a sigh of pure relief. The effect was immediate and absolutely not restful. Light exploded outward from the throne in concentric rings of gold and white, washing across the walls and flooding through the open door into the corridor beyond. The air filled with a sound like 100 crystal glasses all ringing at once. The throne itself seemed to come alive beneath him, warmth spreading through the material, and Ben felt something scanning him, reading him, analyzing him down to his component molecules. He tried to stand. The throne held him gently but absolutely in place, not with force but with something that felt almost like a request. Stay, it seemed to say. Wait. Let me see you. No, 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 Ben said aloud. This is a misunderstanding. I just needed to sit down. I'm very tired. This is not a statement of intent. The throne pulsed brighter. Somewhere in the palace, something that sounded like enormous machinery ground to life with a groan of ancient gears. Alarms began to wail, a cascading symphony of alerts that Ben suspected were not the good kind. Through the doorway, he heard running footsteps. Shouting. The distinctive whine of energy weapons charging. Ben looked down at the throne beneath him, which was now glowing bright enough to read by. You don't happen to have a reset button, do you? The throne's light flickered in what Ben chose to interpret as amusement. This, he reflected, was going to be difficult to explain to human resources. The first 3 people through the door were soldiers in armor that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen an actual human body and didn't care to start now. Their weapons were pointed directly at Ben's chest, which seemed excessive given that he was very clearly unarmed and also still sitting down. Don't move, the lead soldier barked, which Ben found redundant since the throne was still holding him in place with what felt like a very polite but absolutely non-negotiable force field. Wasn't planning on it, Ben said, raising his hands slowly. Listen, I think there's been a mistake. I'm with the tour group from Consolidated Systems. We're here on a team-building exercise. This is probably just a malfunction. The soldier's helmet tilted slightly, which Ben interpreted as confusion. The celestial throne doesn't malfunction. Everything malfunctions, Ben said automatically. It's just a question of finding the right conditions. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? Before the soldier could respond to what was probably not helpful technical advice, more people flooded into the chamber. These weren't soldiers. They wore robes in varying shades of deep blue and silver, and they moved with the kind of urgent grace that suggested they were very important and very concerned. One of them, an elderly man with facial tattoos that seemed to shift in the light, stopped dead when he saw Ben on the throne. Impossible, he whispered. I completely agree, Ben said. If someone could just explain to the chair that I'm nobody important, I'm sure we can resolve this. The elderly man approached slowly, and Ben noticed his hands were shaking. The throne has chosen. After 3 centuries, the throne has chosen. It's made a clerical error, Ben insisted. I'm not even from this planet. I'm from Vancouver. I analyze database systems for a living. Last week my biggest accomplishment was fixing a bug in the payroll software. This is clearly not throne-worthy behavior. More robed figures gathered, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Ben caught fragments of their conversation. Impossible, the bloodline, the burns, test him. None of it sounded encouraging. Then the crowd parted, and she walked in. Ben noticed the ears first because they were impossible not to notice. They swept back from her temples in elegant points, longer than human ears, and they moved slightly as she walked, responding to sounds in the room with tiny adjustments. Her hair was the color of moonlight on water, silver white and perfectly straight, falling past her shoulders. She wore practical clothing, not robes, and she looked at Ben the way someone might look at a puzzle that had just insulted their intelligence. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice carrying an accent that turned the words into music, even though the question itself was definitely not friendly. "Ben Huang. From Vancouver. Earth. Sol system, if that helps narrow it down." He tried to gesture at himself and found the throne still wouldn't let him move his arms more than a few inches. "I really didn't mean to sit here. I was looking for a bathroom." Her expression suggested this was possibly the worst answer he could have given. "You accidentally sat on the celestial throne because you needed a bathroom. The signage in this palace is really unclear," Ben said defensively. "Also, I've been traveling for about 30 hours and my company's travel coordinator apparently booked the cheapest possible flights through space. I'm not making great decisions right now." She turned to the elderly man. "Counselor Vex, what is the throne's status?" The counselor was holding some kind of scanning device, waving it around Ben while squinting at the readout. "It's fully bonded. Full recognition cascade. I'm reading power levels we haven't seen since the First Dynasty." He looked up, his face pale. "Princess Lyrian, the throne believes he is the rightful sovereign." Lyrian. Ben filed the name away, along with the apparently important detail that she was a princess, which meant this situation had just escalated from embarrassing tourist incident to potential international crisis. "The throne is malfunctioning," Lyrian said flatly. "That's what I said." Ben agreed, grateful someone was finally being reasonable. "The throne has never malfunctioned," Counselor Vex said, his voice taking on the quality of someone explaining gravity to a flat earther. "It was created by the founders themselves. It has rejected every heir of royal blood for 300 years. It has burned princes and princesses to ash the moment they touched it. And now it accepts him." He pointed at Ben with something between awe and accusation. The room went very quiet. Ben processed this information and came to what felt like an obvious conclusion. "So what you're saying is that touching this chair is normally fatal, and I just won the universe's worst lottery." "The throne burns those it rejects," Lyrian said, moving closer. Her eyes were an unsettling shade of violet, and they studied him with the intensity of someone cataloging his component parts. "It killed my eldest brother when he was 23. My sister lasted 3 seconds before the flames consumed her. My cousin died before he could even scream." "I'm very sorry for your loss," Ben said, meaning it. "But that really reinforces my point that this is a mistake. I'm not special. I'm aggressively average. My performance reviews literally use the word adequate. The throne has made an error." "The throne doesn't make errors," 3 people said simultaneously, which Ben felt said a lot about this civilization's relationship with troubleshooting. Lyrian crossed her arms. "Tell me something, Ben Huang from Vancouver. Do you have any founder heritage? Any genetic markers that might explain this?" "I'm pretty sure I'm just regular human," Ben said. "My ancestry test said I'm 60% Chinese, 30% European, and 10%, we're not really sure but possibly Mongolian. Nothing in there about ancient space civilizations. Were you sent here? Is this some kind of Earth plot to claim our throne?" "Earth doesn't even know this planet exists," Ben said. "We're still arguing about whether there's life on Europa. This was supposed to be a corporate retreat. My boss said there would be trust falls and maybe a ropes course. I thought Viridian 7 was a resort moon." Lyrian pinched the bridge of her nose between her thumb and forefinger, which Ben recognized as a universal gesture of someone dealing with a profound headache. "Counselor, can we remove him from the throne?" "We can try." Vex didn't sound optimistic. He gestured, and 2 technicians approached with what looked like a crowbar made of light. They positioned it carefully, trying to lever Ben up from the throne. The throne responded by pulsing brighter and making a sound like a disappointed parent. The crowbar dissolved into sparks. "The throne has claimed him," Vex said unnecessarily. "It won't release him until it's satisfied he's acknowledged." Acknowledged as what? Ben asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer and really didn't like it. Lyrian looked at him with an expression somewhere between fury and despair. As Emperor. The throne has chosen you as the rightful sovereign of Viridian 7 and all its colonial territories. Congratulations. You're now the most powerful person in a star system you'd never heard of until today. Ben looked down at the glowing throne beneath him, then back at Lyrian's face, then at the throne released Ben approximately 40 minutes later, which he spent trying very hard not to think about his bladder while a parade of increasingly agitated officials argued over his head about constitutional law. When the golden light finally faded and the invisible force field dissolved, Ben practically sprinted from the chamber, following a mortified palace aide to the nearest facilities. When he emerged, significantly more comfortable and marginally less panicked, he found Lyrian waiting in the corridor with her arms crossed and an expression that suggested she was reconsidering several life choices. "Feel better?" she asked, her tone suggesting this was not actually a question about his well-being. "Physically, yes. Existentially, I'm having some issues." Ben looked around the hallway, which seemed to stretch in impossible directions. "So what happens now? Do I get ceremonially executed or something?" "We don't execute our emperors," Lyrian said, starting to walk. Ben followed, mostly because standing still in this palace seemed likely to result in getting lost forever. "We just let the throne do it for us. Much more efficient. But it didn't execute me." "No," she agreed, her voice tight. "It didn't. Which means we have a problem." They walked through corridors that seemed to shift when Ben wasn't looking directly at them, past rooms filled with artifacts that hummed with residual energy. Other palace inhabitants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, staring at Ben with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. His squeaky shoe echoed off the crystalline walls, providing an undignified soundtrack to what was apparently a constitutional crisis. "Where are we going?" Ben asked. "Your quarters." "I have quarters. The throne chose you. That means you have quarters, servants, a personal guard, access to the Imperial archives, and approximately 17 different factions who will try to kill you before the week is out." Lyrian took a turn down a hallway that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. "The palace has been preparing the sovereign's wing since the throne activated. It works fast when it's motivated." "That's comforting," Ben said. "Wait, did you say 17 factions?" I rounded down. They arrived at a set of doors that looked like they'd been grown rather than built, all organic curves and no visible hinges. The doors swung open at Lyrian's approach, revealing quarters that made Ben's entire apartment back home look like a broom closet. The main room alone was larger than most restaurants, with furniture that appeared to be floating at conversationally appropriate heights and windows that showed a view of the city Ben was reasonably certain was physically impossible from this location in the palace. "This is insane," Ben said, walking inside. Everything hummed with a faint energy, and he could feel the space responding to his presence, lights brightening, temperature adjusting. "I can't stay here. I have a return shuttle to catch. My company is going to wonder where I am." "Your company was contacted an hour ago and informed that you've been detained on matters of planetary security," Lyrian said. She moved to a panel on the wall and pressed her palm against it. A holographic display bloomed to life, showing what appeared to be a family tree made of fire and failure. "This is the royal lineage. 300 years of it. Do you see the pattern?" Ben studied the display. Each name was marked with symbols he couldn't read, but the pattern was clear enough. They all died. Every single heir who touched the throne. Lyrian's finger traced through the generations, and Ben noticed her hand trembled slightly when she reached certain names. The throne was created by the founders, the civilization that seeded this sector thousands of years ago. They built it to choose rulers, to identify those worthy of leading. But something went wrong after the Third Dynasty. The throne started rejecting everyone. Burning them alive. We've been ruled by a regent council ever since, but their authority is always questioned. We need a sovereign. The Empire is fracturing without one. So you're hoping I'm the miracle cure, Ben said, dropping onto what he assumed was a couch but might have been a very comfortable piece of modern art. It adjusted itself to support him perfectly, which was unsettling. Hate to break it to you, but I'm not miracle material. I once locked myself out of my own apartment 3 times in 1 week. The throne doesn't care about your apartment management skills. Lyrian closed the hologram with a gesture. It cares about something else. We just don't know what. Have you tried asking it? She looked at him like he'd suggested they solve the problem by dancing. The throne doesn't communicate. It's a selection mechanism, not a conversationalist. Everything with that much processing power communicates, Ben said, his analyst instincts kicking in despite the absurdity of the situation. It's just a question of understanding the interface. When it was scanning me, I could feel it asking questions. Not in words, but in concepts. It was testing something specific. Lyrian sat down across from him, her ears tilting forward slightly in what Ben was learning to recognize as focused attention. What kind of questions? I don't know exactly. It felt like it was measuring my certainty about things. My assumptions. Like it was looking for doubt. Ben ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize thoughts that felt increasingly surreal. This is going to sound stupid, but when I sat down, I had no idea what I was sitting on. I had no expectations. I was just tired and needed to rest. Do you think that matters? Every heir who approached the throne knew exactly what they were doing, Lyrian said slowly. They were raised from birth believing they would rule. They approached with absolute certainty of their right to claim it. And it killed them for it. Yes. They sat in silence for a moment while Ben processed this. Outside the impossible windows, Viridian 7's twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet. It would have been beautiful if Ben weren't currently having an existential crisis. So what do we do? He asked finally. We keep you alive long enough to figure out what the throne wants, Lyrian said. She stood, her movements precise and controlled. The Regent Council is convening an emergency session tomorrow. They'll want to test you, to verify the throne's choice. The tests are designed for combat and strategy. I'm going to fail spectacularly. Probably. Ben woke to the sound of someone clearing their throat with the persistence of a car alarm. He opened his eyes to find a person standing beside his bed who looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts of several different species and then dressed by someone who'd only heard descriptions of formal wear secondhand. Good morning, Sovereign, the person said with a bow so deep it looked orthopedically inadvisable. I am Kelth, your personal attendant. I have prepared your morning meal, selected appropriate attire for today's council session, and taken the liberty of canceling your return shuttle reservation. Ben sat up slowly, his back protesting the sudden movement. The couch had been comfortable, but apparently alien furniture couldn't fix the fact that he'd slept like someone awaiting execution. What time is it? The 7th hour of morning cycle, Kelth said, which told Ben absolutely nothing useful. The council convenes at 9th hour. Princess Lyrian has requested your presence in the training arena before then. Training arena, Ben repeated. That sounds ominous. It is moderately ominous, Sovereign. Breakfast turned out to be a collection of items that looked edible and smelled like a garden having an identity crisis. Ben ate cautiously while Kelth explained the day's schedule with the enthusiasm of someone describing a funeral procession. The formal attire Kelth had selected looked like it required an engineering degree to put on correctly. Can I just wear my own clothes? Ben asked, looking at his wrinkled button-down shirt and pants with longing. Kelth's expression suggested Ben had just proposed showing up naked. The Sovereign must appear in proper ceremonial dress for all official functions. 20 minutes and several near dislocations later, Ben was dressed in layers of fabric that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He looked in the mirror and saw someone who appeared to be cosplaying as a very confused emperor. Perfect, Kelth said, which was clearly a lie. The training arena turned out to be underground, accessed through corridors that descended far enough that Ben's ears popped twice. The space was enormous, with a ceiling that soared into darkness and a floor made of something that felt springy under his feet. Lyrian was waiting in the center, wearing practical combat gear and holding what appeared to be a weapon made of condensed starlight. "You're late," she said. "I had to put on an outfit that violates several laws of physics," Ben replied. "What is this place?" "The arena where the trials are held. The council will test you here this afternoon." She tossed him something that looked like a cylinder with delusions of grandeur. "That's a practice resonator. It's non-lethal but will definitely hurt if you get hit." Ben caught it awkwardly, nearly dropping it twice. "I feel like I should mention that I failed gym class in high school. The throne chose you anyway." Lyrian activated her own resonator, which extended into a staff that crackled with energy. The trials test combat ability, strategic thinking, and leadership under pressure. You're going to fail at least 2 of those catastrophically. Your motivational speeches need work. I'm not trying to motivate you. I'm trying to keep you alive. She moved into a combat stance that looked both graceful and deadly. The first trial involves defeating a combat drone. It's programmed to test reflexes and tactical thinking. Most candidates study for years to prepare for it. I have about 3 hours. Yes. Lyrian spent the next 2 hours demonstrating techniques that Ben immediately forgot, explaining strategies he couldn't follow, and trying to teach him footwork that his feet refused to cooperate with. He managed to hit her exactly once, entirely by accident when he tripped over his own ceremonial robes and swung wildly while falling. "That was actually not terrible," Lyrian said, helping him up. "If you can make the drone think you're incompetent enough to ignore, you might survive long enough to get lucky. So your strategy is for me to act exactly like myself." Essentially. They broke for water, which came from a fountain that dispensed liquid in flavors Ben didn't have words for. He collapsed against the arena wall, breathing hard, while Lyrian checked something on a data pad. "Why are you helping me?" Ben asked. "Your family lost everything because of the throne. I'd understand if you wanted me to fail." Lyrian's ears flattened slightly against her head. "My oldest brother was kind. He would have been a good emperor, fair and just. The throne burned him to ash. My sister was brilliant, a natural strategist. She lasted 3 seconds. The throne has rejected everyone I've ever loved who tried to claim it." She looked at him, and her violet eyes were bright with something that might have been anger or grief or both. "I don't want you to fail, Ben Huang. I want to understand why you succeeded." Before Ben could respond, a door at the far end of the arena opened and Counselor Vex entered, followed by a floating platform carrying what looked like a very aggressive collection of metal and malice. "The council has convened early," Vex announced. "They wish to begin the trials immediately. Now." Ben looked down at himself, still sweating and breathing hard from practice. "I'm not ready." "No one is ever ready," Lyrian said quietly. "That might be the point." The arena began filling with spectators, appearing in viewing galleries that materialized from the walls like the palace was growing them specifically for this purpose. Ben recognized members of the Regent Council in their formal robes, military commanders in elaborate uniforms, and what appeared to be the general public, all gathered to watch him either prove himself or die trying. "No pressure," Ben muttered. The combat drone activated with a sound like a swarm of mechanical wasps. It was roughly spherical, covered in sensors and what were definitely weapons, and it floated in the air with the confidence of something that had never lost a fight. An amplified voice echoed through the arena. "The first trial will now commence. Candidate Ben Huang must defeat or disable the Sentinel drone within 10 minutes. Failure will result in termination of candidacy." "What does termination mean in this context?" Ben asked Lyrian. "Nothing good." The drone shot forward without warning, moving faster than Ben's eyes could track. He dove sideways on pure instinct, hitting the springy floor hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. A blast of energy scorched the space where he'd been standing, leaving a smoking crater. Use the resonator. Lyrian shouted from somewhere outside the combat zone. Ben scrambled to his feet, fumbling with the cylindrical weapon. He had no idea how to activate it. He pressed what. The second trial involved strategic thinking, which Ben passed by treating an ancient military simulation like a resource management game and accidentally discovering an exploit the designers had never anticipated. The third trial required him to activate a founder artifact that hadn't worked in 2 centuries. Ben approached it without any preconceptions about how it should function, pressed what looked like a reset switch, and the device hummed to life while 3 historians fainted in the background. By the time the trials concluded, Ben had somehow succeeded at all of them through a combination of ignorance, panic, and what Lyrian was generously calling unconventional problem-solving. The Regent Council looked like they'd been forced to eat something that disagreed with them on a philosophical level. The trials are complete, Councillor Vex announced to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying none of his earlier certainty. The throne's choice has been validated. Ben stood in the center of the arena, still catching his breath, and realized that validation meant he was actually going to be emperor of an entire star system. This was worse than the time he'd been accidentally promoted to team lead and spent 6 months trying to figure out what team leads actually did. "I'd like to make a statement," Ben said, his voice amplified by the arena's systems. The crowd quieted. Thousands of eyes focused on him with varying degrees of hope, suspicion, and confusion. Ben had never been comfortable with public speaking, but he'd also never accidentally conquered a planet before, so this seemed like a day for new experiences. "I don't belong here," he started, and the murmuring began immediately. "I'm not from your world. I don't understand your customs. I have no training in governance or military strategy or whatever else emperors are supposed to know. The throne made a mistake." "The throne doesn't make mistakes," someone shouted from the galleries, and Ben was getting really tired of that phrase. "Then maybe it didn't make a mistake," Ben continued. "Maybe it made a point. For 300 years, it rejected everyone who thought they deserved to rule. Everyone who was certain of their right to power. It waited for someone who had no certainty at all." He looked up at the viewing galleries, trying to make eye contact with as many people as possible. "I think the throne is tired. I think it's been trying to tell you something for centuries, and you've been too focused on tradition to listen." Councillor Vex stepped forward. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we ask it directly." Ben turned and walked toward the arena exit. "Take me back to the throne room." The procession that formed was somewhere between a parade and a funeral march. Ben led the way, still in his ridiculous ceremonial robes, with Lyrian beside him and half the palace following behind. When they reached the circular chamber, the throne sat waiting in its pool of light, looking exactly as it had when Ben had first stumbled onto it. He climbed the dais steps and sat down deliberately this time, prepared for what would happen. The light bloomed around him, golden and warm, and Ben felt the throne's presence in his mind like a conversation conducted in concepts rather than words. "Talk to me," Ben said aloud. "Everyone thinks you're just a selection mechanism, but you're more than that, aren't you? You're an intelligence. You've been watching this empire for thousands of years. You rejected the royal bloodline because they stopped questioning themselves. They forgot how to doubt. They forgot how to grow." The throne pulsed, and Ben felt something like confirmation. Images flooded his mind, the founders creating the throne not as a tool for selecting rulers but as a teacher, a guide meant to push civilizations toward wisdom rather than power. The throne had tried for 3 centuries to show Viridian 7 that certainty was dangerous, that absolute power corrupted absolutely, that the best leaders were those who questioned their right to lead. "You don't want to choose emperors anymore," Ben said, understanding washing over him. "You want to retire." The throne's light flickered with what Ben could only interpret as relief. He looked out at the assembled crowd. The throne was never meant to rule forever. It was meant to guide you until you learned to govern yourselves. It chose me because I have no authority here, no claim to power, no ability to actually rule. It chose me as a placeholder. A temporary solution while you figure out what comes next. And what comes next? Lyrian asked, stepping forward. Her ears were perked forward, and her expression was intense. That's up to you, Ben said. The throne has given you 3 centuries to think about alternatives to monarchy. Maybe it's time to actually try them. Counselor Vex looked scandalized. You're suggesting we abandon the throne entirely? I'm suggesting you evolve past needing it. Ben stood, and this time the throne released him immediately, its light fading to a gentle glow. The founders gave you a tool for selecting wise leaders. You've spent 300 years mourning the fact that it stopped selecting your preferred candidates. Maybe instead of trying to fix the selection process, you should question whether you need someone else to choose your leaders at all. The chamber erupted in argument. Some people looked outraged, others thoughtful, many simply confused. Ben stepped down from the dais and found Lyrian waiting. You're proposing democracy, she said quietly. On a planet that's been ruled by emperors for millennia. I'm proposing you try something new, Ben corrected. The throne thinks you're ready. It wouldn't have chosen me otherwise. I'm the worst possible emperor, which makes me the perfect last emperor. The council will never agree. Then let them vote on it. Ben smiled. Practice makes perfect. Over the following weeks, Ben served as what he called a transitional administrator, and what the palace staff called the sovereign who won't sit still. He refused to live in the imperial quarters, moved back to a regular hotel, and spent his days helping Lyrian and a group of reform-minded council members draft a new governmental structure. The throne sat silent in its chamber, no longer glowing, its work apparently finished. Not everyone was happy. There were protests, assassination attempts that Ben avoided mostly through being too unpredictable to target effectively, and several formal complaints about his administration filed by people who seemed unclear on the concept that he was trying to make administration itself obsolete. But there were also people who remembered what it was like before the throne rejected them, who were tired of 3 centuries of regency and stagnation, who wanted to try something new. Slowly, painfully, with many arguments and several near disasters, a framework for representative government began to take shape. On Ben's last day on Viridian 7, he returned to the throne room one final time. Lyrian was with him, wearing practical clothing instead of royal regalia, her long years relaxed and unguarded. The first elections are scheduled for next month, she said. I'm running for the administrative council. You'll win, Ben said confidently. You actually know what you're doing, which puts you ahead of most politicians. What will you do? Go back to Vancouver and analyze database systems? Eventually. Ben looked at the throne, dark and quiet now. But I think I'll take a vacation first. An actual vacation, at a resort that has clearly marked bathrooms and furniture that doesn't try to make me emperor. Lyrian laughed, and the sound echoed through the chamber like music. The throne chose well. Not because you'd be a good emperor, but because you were brave enough to refuse. I wasn't brave, Ben said. I was just confused and sleep-deprived. Sometimes that's the same thing. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching light from the twin suns stream through the oculus above. The throne remained dark, its purpose fulfilled, its lesson finally learned. Somewhere in the palace, people were arguing about electoral districts and term limits and all the messy details of self-governance. It was chaos, but it was productive chaos, the kind that built futures instead of maintaining past glories. Ben's shuttle left that evening. As Viridian 7 shrank